My name is Ren Halloway, and I'm 36 years old. 4 days before Thanksgiving, I came home from a 16-hour ER shift and found my whole life sitting on my parents' driveway in blue moving totes, lined up like luggage at a funeral, with a brand new keypad lock glowing on the front door. I'm a paramedic. I had spent 3 years under that roof managing my father's heart failure, and my family shut me out the way you'd close an app you got tired of. That morning, I still believed there was an explanation. By the night before Thanksgiving, I was writing my name into the sign-in book of a county warming shelter 6 blocks from the hospital where I trained. And something a stranger said to me on the cot next to mine that night split my entire family history down the middle. What I did with that information, none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Quiet Reckonings, where the women who held everyone up finally learned to put themselves down first. Told slow, the way you'd tell it across a kitchen table at midnight. If any of this sounds like your own life, drop it in the comments and subscribe before we go back to that driveway. Let me take you back 4 days before Thanksgiving, while my scrubs still smelled like the ambulance bay. I stood on the driveway and counted the totes. 7 of them, 36 years, zipped shut with the same brand of packing tape my mother buys in bulk from the hardware store. I knocked on the door of the house I had covered 2/3 of the mortgage on for 3 years. It opened on the chain, 4 inches, and my mother looked at me through the gap like a stranger asking for donations. She told me the house had gone under contract, that closing was set for December, and that it was time everyone learned to stand on their own. I asked her to repeat it, slower, because I had been awake since 3 the previous afternoon and thought exhaustion was scrambling her words. She didn't repeat it slower. She repeated it flatter. Behind her, down the hallway, I could see the outline of my father in his recliner, his oxygen line coiled beside the chair, and he did not turn his head. I said, "Mom, it's 4 days before Thanksgiving." I said, "I have been covering the mortgage." I heard my own voice do the thing it does with families in the family consult room, level, careful, holding the room steady. She looked at me through that 4-inch gap and delivered a line she had clearly been sharpening for years. "In this house, you earn your place." Then the door clicked shut, quiet as a med-cart wheel. I stood there in my scrubs while the first flurries of the season landed on the totes, and one cold, calm thought rose up in me. She hadn't even sounded angry. You don't get angry canceling a subscription, you just cancel it. What I did not know yet was why the house had to sell that fast, or where the money was already spoken for. Let me back up 3 years so you understand how a working paramedic ends up locked out of her childhood home with 7 totes on the driveway. When my father's heart started failing, I was renting a studio across the city and working full-time transport. My mother called me from a hospital corridor, crying in that rehearsed way she has, and said, "Ren, we just need you for a little while." So I did what daughters like me do. I broke my lease, cut my hours to manage his appointments, and moved back into my old bedroom with the water-stained ceiling I grew up under. My mother set up what she called the shared account, her name and mine both on it, because she said, "Honey, you work nights. Let me handle the bills so nothing bounces." Every 2 weeks my paycheck landed in that account. $2,200 give or take. His medication, the mortgage, the electric bill, her salon visits, all of it drawn from the same well. And I was the only one filling it. I want to be honest with you, because I know how this sounds. I was not oblivious. In October, I went through the statement and found an $11,000 transfer out of the shared account into a money market fund with only her name attached. I asked her about it that same night, straight across the kitchen table. She slid a folder of pharmacy receipts toward me like she was closing a case and asked if I wanted my father going without his medication. I moved my direct deposit back to my own account within the week. But 3 years of money had already gone into that well. Legally, that was a gift. $61,000 of gift. And a contractor's white van had started parking in our driveway on Thursdays. I had asked about the van too. A man in a company polo walked the yard taking photos on a tablet, and I came outside and asked my mother who he was. She didn't flinch. "Insurance inspection," she said. "Premiums are out of control these days." There was never a sign in the yard. There was never going to be a sign in the yard, because my mother has never once in her life invited a question she didn't already control the answer to. So now do the math with me, standing on that driveway 4 days before Thanksgiving. My own checking account held $900 because everything else had been swimming in her well. My car had started grinding gears the week before, and the shop quoted $1,400 to rebuild a transmission on a car worth maybe $1,000. The agency had cut my shifts hard going into the holiday because that's when it happens. Families come home, census drops, and God bless them for it. Every apartment complex in the county wanted first, last, deposit, and proof of income triple the rent, and my proof of income looked like a woman who had spent 3 years working part-time for her mother's well. The Palace Inn off the interstate ran $84 a night, and I sat in my dying car in that parking lot and rationed my own life the way I titrate a drip. Enough, and not one drop more. 2 nights, I told myself. 2 nights while I fix this, because there had to be a way to fix this. That afternoon, I made a call I had sworn I would never make. I called the police on my own family. The officer who showed up at the Palace Inn was young and gentle and completely useless. He listened, nodded, wrote almost nothing. "Ma'am, you lived there 3 years. That likely makes you a tenant. And a lockout like this isn't legal. But it's a civil matter. Civil matter." I would come to hate that phrase the way I hate a wound that won't close. He couldn't march my mother out for changing a lock code. I'd have to file, serve notice, and wait on a docket that wouldn't open again until well into the new year. I called legal aid from the motel bed and got a cheerful recording. Closed for the holiday, reopening after the new year. If this is an emergency, dial 911. I almost laughed, because which emergency exactly? My coworker Dana offered me her couch before I even finished the sentence, then remembered out loud that her sister's family had already claimed it, plus an air mattress in the hall, and her voice went small with a shame that belonged to my mother, not to her. And here is the part I need you to sit with, because it's the question everyone asks. No, I could not just force my way back in. Breaking a lock on a door you're not on the deed for is a crime, full stop. And more than that, my father was behind that door, tethered to an oxygen tank that could not run on adrenaline. I had spent 10 years keeping other people's worst moments calm. I wasn't going to hand my own father one, live, through a doorway. So I did the thing that still stuns me when I think back on it. I waited politely while the water kept rising. Checkout at the Palace Inn was 11 the morning before Thanksgiving, and I stood at the front desk holding my card while the clerk apologized to a spot on the wall past my shoulder. A busted water line had flooded half the rooms overnight, and a highway pileup had stranded travelers into the rest. And no, he could not extend me, and yes, he was sorry. The next motel sat 9 miles up the interstate. My transmission had finally died completely in that parking lot the night before, and the car limped forward with all the confidence of a shopping cart with a locked wheel, and the buses in my town stop running at 6 on the day before a holiday if they run at all. I would love to tell you I handled it with grace. Mostly, I sat in my dead car behind the ambulance bay wearing 3 layers, running the math in a spiral notebook I keep for report writing. I had spent 10 years charting other people's declines. Mine took 4 days start to finish and fit on a single page. I washed my hair in the locker room sink with the industrial soap and told the new tech I'd been camping, and she believed me or was kind enough to let it stand, which by that point amounted to the same mercy. Around 4, the temperature started dropping fast, and the radio started warning about an Arctic front, wind advisories, single digits by midnight. I walked to a gas station for coffee, counting my cash out of habit, and that's when I saw the paper sign taped inside the dark window of the 5th Street Community Center, hand-lettered in blue marker, "Warming shelter open tonight, all welcome." All welcome, apparently, even me. By 8 that night, it was 7 degrees, and the wind came down 5th Street like it had somewhere to be. 6 blocks from the gas station to the shelter, and I know because I counted them the way you count contractions, something to do that isn't feeling. I stood across the street from that building longer than I will ever admit to anyone but you. The windows glowed that flat fluorescent gold, and through the glass I could see folding cots, a coffee urn, a volunteer stacking donated blankets. I had a job, a license in good standing, and a retirement account with $3,100 in it that would cost me a penalty to touch and wouldn't clear for weeks anyway. I had a family 2 miles away with a keypad glowing on their new lock. And I stood there in a 7-degree wind negotiating with a door because walking through it meant admitting out loud what I had become that night. There is a specific pride that gets women like me hurt. I've seen it in patients, the ones who won't hit the call button, who apologize for bleeding on the gurney. I heard my own voice, the work voice, say out loud into the empty street, "Honey, you're freezing and that building is warm, and that is the entire situation." So I crossed. The door was heavier than it looked. Inside it smelled like burnt coffee and wet wool and someone's cinnamon candle, and a volunteer with a clipboard smiled at me without a trace of judgment and asked for a name for the sign-in sheet. I gave him my family's name, and my voice cracked on the second syllable. They gave me cot 11 along the back wall, under a paper turkey some kid had cut a little crooked. The room held maybe 25 people that night. An older man with a cough I clocked as bronchitis before I'd even set my bag down. A young father with 2 kids drawing on the backs of donation forms. A woman in a canvas coat asleep sitting upright against the wall. Volunteers in Thanksgiving sweaters moved table to table with hot chocolate. I lasted maybe 15 minutes as a guest. Then I saw a volunteer kneeling over a man's ankle, holding gauze like it might detonate, and my body just stood up and went, 10 years of habit wearing my legs like a jacket. I wrapped the ankle properly, checked 2 blood pressures, and talked the coughing man into a promise he'd hit urgent care in the morning. It helped me more than it helped them. Being useful is my resting pulse. And in that room, for the first time, I felt the difference between being useful because you're loved and being useful because you're afraid of what happens when you stop. I sat back down on cot 11 with that thought sitting heavy in my chest when a woman lowered herself onto the cot beside me, 2 paper cups of cocoa in her hands, and passed me one like we'd known each other for decades. Gray hair pulled into a low knot, reading glasses on a beaded chain, hands steady, eyes sharp. I'd have guessed retired detective, or the woman who runs the county fair like a small war. She watched the kids drawing for a while, then turned to me, easy and warm, and asked the question that split my life open. "What's your name, honey?" "Wren," I told her. "Wren Holloway." I watched it land on her face. She set her cocoa down on the floor, slow and deliberate, the way you put down something you can't afford to drop, and both hands came up to cover her mouth. The sound that came out of her had clearly been waiting years to get free. The cots creaked, the kids kept drawing, the hot chocolate kept steaming, and she just stared at me over her fingertips with her eyes filling. I ran the checklist you run: stroke, blood sugar, grief. She shook her head like she could hear me doing it. "Holloway," she said. "Your grandmother? Was her name Iris? Iris off Belmont Street. Iris with the roses." And the cold came back into me all over again, because my grandmother had been dead 18 years, and nobody in my family brought her up. In my family, Grandma Iris was a closed case file, a difficult woman, a story with the ending sanded off. I said yes, Iris was my grandmother. The woman took my hand in both of hers, and hers were shaking, and mine, I noted clinically, had gone very still. "Honey," she said, "my name is Odette Marsh, and I have been looking for you for 18 years. Quick pause. From me to you, wherever you're listening tonight. If you've ever been the one your family calls first and thanks last, tell me where you're watching from. I read every single comment, and it helps more than you'd think to know I wasn't the only one. Because what Odette Marsh said next, on a cot the night before Thanksgiving, is the entire reason you're hearing this story. She said, "Your grandmother hired me, and she left you something, but there was a condition. And sweetheart, you just met it tonight." I did not believe her. I want that on the record because I have watched enough scam artists work enough grieving families to know exactly how this sounds. A stranger in a shelter who knows your name produces a dead relative and dangles an inheritance. That is not fate. That is a Tuesday in elder fraud. So I asked her flat, clinical questions, and Odette Marsh answered every single one without reaching for a note. She knew my middle name was June, after Iris's own mother. She knew about the burn scar on my grandmother's left forearm, the pale line from a bakery oven in 1986, because Iris had rolled up her sleeve at their very first meeting and told Odette to use it to recognize her granddaughter's people by their damage. That sounded so exactly like the grandmother I remembered that my throat closed on itself. Then Odette pulled out her phone, scrolled slow with the patience of a woman in reading glasses, and turned the screen toward me. A photograph of a photograph, me at 10, missing a front tooth standing in front of my grandmother's rose bushes holding a wicker basket like a trophy. I remembered that basket. I remembered that entire afternoon, the last summer they ever let me visit. Odette told me she'd been a licensed private investigator out of the county seat for 29 years, retired at 63, and that in the winter of 2006, a small, straight-backed woman had walked into her office, set a folder on the desk, and said she needed someone patient, not fast, patient. Iris Holloway, Odette said, was the most organized client she had ever taken on, and she'd done skip traces for 3 different banks in her career. The shelter was dimming its lights. Volunteers were steering kids toward cots. 18 years, I said. Nobody looks for anybody for 18 years. Odette smiled with half her mouth. You were never lost, honey. That was never the job. I wasn't tracking where you were, she said. I always knew where you were. Same town, same job, same street. God help you. I was tracking the day you'd need me, and I spent 18 years hoping that day would never come. She said Iris had paid her a retainer and left instructions that read less like a case file and more like a weather warning. Watch my granddaughter. Once a year is plenty, you'll know the day when it lands. And when Odette had asked, at that very first meeting, how she would know, Iris had paused, looked at nothing in particular for a second, and said, the day will look like this. My son and his wife will be finished with her. She'll be standing outside their door with nothing of theirs left in her hands. It will probably be winter. I sat there with the cocoa going cold in my fist, and everything left in me that was still a daughter tried to object. They're not bad people, I heard myself say. It's been a hard few years. Dad's heart, the bills. You don't understand the pressure my mother's under. Odette nodded along with the face of a woman who has heard this exact testimony before. Iris used to defend them in that same voice, she said, word for word. It used to wear her out completely. Then she leaned in, took both my hands, and said the sentence I've carried every day since, gently. The way you deliver a diagnosis. She knew they would do this to you, that's why I'm here. The kids finished their drawings and were tucked in. I sat on cot 11 and let 18 years quietly rearrange themselves in my chest. Thanksgiving morning, the shelter served eggs and toast and sent us out into a world that had no idea anything had happened. Odette took me to the only diner open in the county, ordered us both the special, and lifted a bundle out of her tote bag like it was something sleeping. Envelopes, a thick stack of them tied with kitchen string, 82 of them, everyone addressed in my grandmother's tight, upright cursive to Miss Wren Holloway, Cardinal Lane. The stamps climbed 3 years of postal rates, from when I was 10 to when I was 13, nearly one a month for 3 straight years. And across the face of every single one, in a slanted, even hand I knew better than my own, the same verdict, returned to sender. My mother's handwriting, the same hand that signed my permission slips and my birthday cards. 82 times sending an old woman's love back like a package that never fit through the slot. I laid them out across the diner table in rows while my eggs went cold. In my family, the story of Grandma Iris was exactly 3 sentences long, recited whenever a kid asked, and built to end the asking. She got difficult after Grandpa died. She got confused. She pulled away from the family, and it broke your father's heart. Nobody pulls away and writes 2 letters a month for 3 years. Nobody confused keeps 18 years of property taxes current. But I didn't know that part yet. What I knew, sitting in a vinyl booth on Thanksgiving morning, was that the woman I'd been told forgot us had written to me 82 times while I was 3 miles away being told she didn't want to see me. The last envelope in the stack was postmarked in April. Odette said Iris died that same week, on a Tuesday. I asked the obvious question, the angry one. If Grandma left me something, why would she make me lose absolutely everything first to get it? What kind of love comes with a condition like that? Odette stirred her coffee for a long moment, then recited the answer like she'd said it to herself for 18 years, because it came out worn smooth like a prayer. Not while she's living under their roof, the day she's standing outside their door with nothing of theirs left in her hands. Give it to her then, before that they'd take it, and she'd let them. I opened my mouth to argue with a dead woman, then closed it, because I ran the honest experiment. The one you're supposed to run? Say I'm 25. Say a lawyer calls and tells me my grandmother left me property and money. What does 25-year-old Wren do with that? I knew the answer before I finished asking it, and so do you. There's a family meeting at the kitchen table. There's my mother saying it would be selfish to sit on a windfall while the roof leaks and Dad's heart medication isn't cheap. There's the phrase family resources produced like a legal term. And there's me. Good girl, strong one. Our nurse, nodding, signing, pouring it into the well with everything else I ever earned, and feeling noble about it for a month. My grandmother hadn't set a condition on her love. She'd written a prescription, and like all the good ones, it was hard to swallow and exactly measured. Do not administer until the patient can keep it down. Odette watched me work through all of that and didn't say a word. Then she paid the check and made one phone call, on Thanksgiving morning, to a man named Harold Pierce. Harold Pierce turned out to be a semi-retired attorney with a small office above the credit union, a cardigan the color of weak tea, and the unhurried diction of a man who has outlived everyone who ever tried to rush him. He met us 2 days later. "Miss Halloway," he said, shaking my hand once formally, "I have kept a drawer locked for 18 years, and I would very much like to retire. Please sit down." What he pulled out of that drawer was thinner than I expected. A trust, the Iris Halloway Trust, dated 2006. Inside it, a cottage out on Silver Pine Lake, 45 minutes north, which my grandmother had bought in 1976 with money from her own late brother, and titled so quietly her son never once knew it existed, and an account. Iris had sold her house on Belmont Street herself at 71 before anyone in the family could help her do it, and put $92,000 of the proceeds into the trust, with instructions to pay the cottage's taxes and upkeep for as long as the money held. 18 years of taxes, insurance, and a neighbor paid to keep the pipes from freezing had worn it down to $26,000 and change. "Not a fortune," Pierce said, watching me over his glasses. She was very clear it wasn't supposed to be a fortune. She said fortunes get families involved. Then he slid a small envelope across the desk, my name on it in that upright hand. Inside was a single brass key on a loop of faded green ribbon. My breath caught somewhere strange, because I knew that ribbon. It was the ribbon from her kitchen curtains. The ones with the cardinals on them. I used to tie bows with the ends while she rolled out dough. Pierce cleared his throat. "She said you'd know the ribbon. She said that would do instead of a speech." Odette drove me out that same afternoon, 45 minutes north on roads that got quieter and wider until Silver Pine Lake opened up on the left like something exhaling. The cottage sat back behind 2 bare oaks, white siding gone gray at the corners, a red door. The brass key turned like the lock had been waiting patiently the whole time. Inside, the cold had that clean stillness of a room nobody has lied in for years. The neighbor had kept the pipes and the roof sound, not the shelves. Her quilt sat folded over the rocker, her recipe tin stood on the counter, and the window over the sink looked out at the lake exactly the way a person looks at something they chose on purpose. And on the kitchen table, square in the center, one envelope, marked for my girl, when they're done with her. I sat down in my coat and read my grandmother's letter in the gray light of a November afternoon. She told me what had happened with no self-pity at all in that steady hand. How after my grandfather died, my parents began managing her. The car first, then the checkbook, then the doctor visits, until she stopped being told what the word help actually meant, and how the arithmetic underneath it was her house. How she sold it out from under that arithmetic at 71. And how the bill for that came due in the only currency that could really wound her, me. They stopped bringing me to visit. They told her I was too busy. They told me she'd forgotten us. She wrote until the very end anyway, and near the bottom of the last page, in letters pressed slightly harder, she left me this. "I intend to leave this world knowing you were never the debt, Wren. You were the girl." I stayed. Of course I stayed. It was mine, though it took my body a solid week to believe it. And I kept catching myself tiptoeing like a guest in my own house. That dead week between the holidays, I read all 82 letters in order. In the rocker under her quilt, the lake groaning and cracking outside the way ice does. Reading them felt like getting my own childhood back with the redactions lifted. Every summer after I turned 10, we were suddenly too busy for the lake, and now I knew exactly why the invitations never reached me. The postscripts asked about my spelling tests. She knew my teachers' names. She knew details my mother must have let slip on the phone in the years before the door shut, and she hoarded them the way you hoard details of a person you're not allowed to see. One letter, near the middle of the stack, stopped me completely because it wasn't about me at all. It said, "They have started calling you our little medic, and everyone laughs. And I do not laugh. Wren, you were 10. You had been assigned the family emergency the way other kids get assigned the dishes." She saw the job description being written for my whole life while it was still considered cute. I sat with that one for a long time, In December, I got practical, because practical is my first language. I bought Odette's nephew's old sedan for $1,400, transferred my card to the branch out by the lake, learned which floorboard creaked. I told no one in my family where I'd gone, not out of strategy. I just wanted one place on this earth with no math attached to it. In a town our size, I got exactly 11 days. It was the hardware store that gave me away, which I can admit is almost funny. I bought 2 smoke detectors, and the woman ringing me up plays cards with my mother's cousin, and by that following Tuesday, the family phone chain had processed, cross-referenced, and delivered its verdict. Ren Halloway is living out at old Iris's place on Silver Pine Lake. Did you even know Iris had a place? On the 12th day, my phone lit up with Mom, and I stood at the kitchen window watching it ring 3 times before I picked up. The voice that came through was one I hadn't heard in years. Warm, syrup warm. "Sweetheart," she said. Thanksgiving got completely out of hand. Everyone was under so much pressure. You know how your father's heart has us all stretched thin. "Come home, honey. We're family." I looked out at the lake while she talked. I run a translation exercise now, automatic as taking a pulse. I listen to my mother and mark exactly where the ledger shows through the fabric. It took about 90 seconds, because right after "come home and we've missed you and it was all a misunderstanding," her voice made a small, business-like pivot, the one it makes once the pleasantries are paid off, and she said, "And when you're home, we can sit down and talk about the lake place as a family." There it was. I asked her one question, quiet, no edge on it at all, a thermometer of a question. "Mom, whose name was on the deed of the house you just sold?" The line went so silent I could hear her kitchen clock. Then she said we'd talk soon, love you, and she was gone. She never once asked where I'd slept the night before Thanksgiving. It genuinely had not come up. My cousin Priya is 25, my aunt's daughter, and the only person in my family who texts me like a human being instead of a subpoena. She called that week and gave me the picture nobody else would. The house on Cardinal Lane hadn't sold because of the market. It sold because of the math. 2 years of my father's cardiac copays, a home equity loan I never knew existed, credit cards, back taxes. They'd closed fast at a low price to close fast, and after the debts, there wasn't much left standing. They were renting a 2-bedroom off the highway now. "Aunt Deb's been telling the whole family you came into Grandma Iris's money," Priya said, sounding like she was handing me something sharp-side first. "Nobody even knew there was money. Mom's been on the phone about it for days." So that was the machine, and I finally saw the whole shape of it. I hadn't been thrown out in a fit of cruelty. I'd been liquidated calmly, the way they'd liquidated the house, an asset that had stopped producing, cleared off the books before the next move. It was somehow worse and easier, knowing you can't hate a spreadsheet. Late that same night, my phone rang again, and the screen said "Dad," and something in my chest lurched sideways, because my father had not dialed a phone on his own since his diagnosis. I picked up and heard the long, labored breathing first, then his voice, thinner than I remembered. "Your grandmother," he said, long pause, always kept her word. That was all, a television murmured somewhere behind him. Then the line went dead, or the phone slipped. I'll never know which. I stood in her kitchen holding the recipe tin like it was his hand. 2 days later, an envelope came from my mother, thick paper, a dinner invitation. "Family dinner, Aunt Deb's house, Saturday 6 o'clock. Please come. We all want a fresh start." My mother's handwriting, the same even slant I now recognized from 82 envelopes. Odette came by for coffee and read it on the table without touching it. The way you look at a trap you already know is a trap. "They'll have an agenda," she said, "and you're the only item on it. I already knew that. I'd like to tell you I walked in armored and finished, but this is a true accounting. So here's the truth. I went because some ancient kid part of me heard we all want you there and sat up like it had been fed a scent it recognized. Because it might be real. Because wanting your family to want you isn't a character flaw, whatever it costs you. And I had wanted it for 36 years and did not know how to switch it off on 2 weeks' notice. But I had changed in one measurable way, and I could feel it while I got ready. I wasn't bringing anything they could deposit. No checkbook, no paperwork, no decisions to sign off on. I brought a pie instead. Her crust from the recipe tin, apple with the lattice top. I'd practiced it twice. And if you think a pie is nothing, you never learned what my grandmother could say with one. I drove the 45 minutes south with it warm on the passenger seat, my chest doing something like a shift change handoff the whole way there. Aunt Deb's porch light was on, and through the front window I could see them already seated in the living room, coats off, waiting. Nobody was laughing. It looked exactly like a deposition. They were lovely for the first 20 minutes. I'll give them that, because it makes what happened at minute 21 land harder, not softer. Deb hugged me at the door and smelled like every Thanksgiving of my childhood. My mother said the pie was beautiful. My father sat at the end of the couch with his oxygen tank parked beside him. And when I bent to kiss his cheek, his hand found my wrist and squeezed it twice, like a code. Then the plates were cleared, and my mother set her coffee cup down with a click that called the room to order, and the agenda began. She had printed pages, actual pages, from a realtor at her church, a comp sheet for a lakefront property, Silver Pine Lake, with a suggested listing price highlighted in yellow. They had valued my grandmother's cottage before they'd even asked me to pass the potatoes. "Your father needs real care, Wren," she said in her reasonable voice. "The one that arrives pre-insulted for when you disagree with it, more than I can manage with my back. That place is just sitting empty. Iris was family. She'd have wanted it looking after her own family. We sell it, we get your father set up properly, and everything goes back to normal." Around the table, heads were nodding at me. Deb's husband, a cousin I hadn't seen since a funeral. I looked at my mother and asked what exactly normal meant. She smiled like I'd finally asked a smart question. "You come home, sweetheart. We find a place with room for you. You help with your father. You're the medic. In this house you earn your place, Wren. Your father earned yours the day you were born." There it was, the whole religion of the family in 2 sentences, with a yellow highlighter run through it. I set my fork down, and I remember the sound it made, that small bell of it, because the room had gone that quiet, waiting for the strong one to say of course. And I heard myself speak in the voice I use at 3 a.m. when a family is asking for one more round of compressions that will only prolong the dying, level, kind, and entirely without give. I said, "No." I said I would not be selling my grandmother's cottage. Not tonight, not ever. And then, because I had spent 2 weeks preparing for this table, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself, I laid out what I would do instead. I had already pulled together every discharge summary and medication list I'd kept across 3 years of appointments. I named the county cardiac program and the 3 facilities worth touring, and the one with the dedicated heart failure unit where I already knew the charge nurse by name. I said I would be his care coordinator myself, free, forever. Every appointment, every medication review, every family meeting, my name first on every chart. "I'll give him my hands and my head," I said. "The cottage stays my grandmother's." You'd have thought I flipped the table. "Deb actually stood up, after everything your mother has sacrificed." My mother went pale, then wet-eyed, in one practiced motion, and the cousin studied his coffee like it owed him an answer. Only my father didn't move. I gathered my coat, thanked Deb for dinner, and left the pie behind. Let me say this straight to you before that door even closes behind me. If you have ever told your family no out loud, one clean sentence, then you already know the exact sound a room like that makes. Comment below if you've heard that silence yourself, and subscribe, because what my mother did with that no is the reason this story has a third act at all. The story was loose through the family by Monday, and it was a good story if you didn't actually know me. Wren got secret money from crazy old Iris and turned her back on her dying father. Wren picked a dead woman's cottage over the man who raised her. 2 aunts quietly stopped answering my texts. No announcement, just conversations that stopped mid-sentence like a road washed out. The church group chat processed me from person to cautionary tale inside a week. I'd love to tell you it bounced right off me, but I'm the one telling you this story, so it landed every single hit. Then Priya called late one night, working through her own guilt about her mother, and in the middle of apologizing, she handed me the missing page of my entire life. "You know Aunt Deb pulled the same move, right?" she said. I asked what move, and Priya told me what Deb had let slip once, loose after a few drinks at a barbecue. That my mother, at 19, had worked the register at the plant downtown and handed her paycheck to her own father every single Friday, sealed, right after she'd been accepted into a nursing program 2 towns over. Nursing, of all the things on this earth, and her father told her a family isn't a hotel you check out of when it suits you. So she stayed. She met my dad on that same factory floor, and she never brought up nursing school again. I sat there with the phone warm against my ear, feeling something I had no room left to store, pity with rage still wet underneath it. My mother wasn't born holding a ledger. Somebody handed it to her at 19, at a kitchen table exactly like ours, and nobody ever once told her she was allowed to put it down. Understanding that changed nothing about my locks. It changed everything about my aim. Here's the part of a story like this nobody tells you. The stretch between the dramatic dinners, ordinary life ticking along while your whole nervous system renegotiates its contract. I fixed the porch step. I picked up good shifts at the Lake branch of the county service. I came home every night to a house that asked nothing of me. Odette started showing up Sundays with crossword puzzles and did them out loud in the rocker like she'd been issued the property along with me. By daylight, I was genuinely happy. It was 3 a.m. that had teeth. I'd wake with my pulse going and my brain already 6 moves into the old arithmetic. If I sold, if I signed, if I just went back and took the couch and the night shifts, Mom's voice would go warm again by spring. I want you to hear how that felt from inside it, because from outside it looks like weakness, and it isn't. It felt exactly like a craving. Being needed had been my job, my rank, my entire face in that family for 36 years, and quitting it felt less like freedom and more like withdrawal. I'd lie awake in my grandmother's house at 3 a.m., missing my own captivity like a pulled tooth, tonguing the hole where it used to be. On the worst of those nights, I did the one thing that actually helped. I wrote my father a letter, just to him, large print for his weaker eye, the 3 facilities, what each one cost, what his coverage handled, my new number, and at the bottom, Dad, I'm not gone, I'm just done being the budget. Love, Ren. I mailed it to the rental on a Tuesday. 2 weeks later, an envelope came back to my box out at the lake, my own envelope, my own handwriting on the front, my father's name, the rental address, and across it, in that same even slanted cursive, the same old verdict. Return to sender. I stood at the mailbox on a gray January afternoon, the lake groaning behind me, and understood I was holding letter number 83. Same hand, same 2 words, same job that hand had always done, standing between a Halloway and someone who loved her for free. My mother had done to my letter to my father this year exactly what she had done to 82 of my grandmothers. Odette's voice came back to me on the wind like a second opinion confirming the first. She knew they would do this to you. There were no tears left in the account for my mother. That well had run dry a long time ago. I drove home and noticed the word, because I did. Home now meant the lake. I untied the ribbon, set my returned envelope on top of the stack, and the pile accepted it perfectly. And something about that quiet click of completion was the coldest thing I felt all winter. I made tea, sat in the rocker under the quilt while the wind worked the shutters and thought, so that's finished then. That's the whole shape of it now. Nothing left that can surprise me. It was a Friday night in early February. At 11, the phone rang. It was Priya, and she was crying before she finished saying my name. It's Uncle Ray, she said. A bad episode. His heart. They took him to County General Wren. Aunt Deb's telling the doctors his daughter's a medic and she's coming to take him home. I drove the 45 minutes south with the roads black and glittering, and I used every mile of it deciding exactly who was walking into that hospital because 2 women could have made that drive. One was the little medic, the strong one, arriving to be spent down to nothing. The other was somebody I had spent 10 weeks building in a house by a lake. I parked and walked into County General as both his daughter and a professional, and God help anyone who tried to collapse the 2 back into one. The cardiac floor at midnight is a sound I know like my own pulse, monitors, soft shoes, the click of an oxygen regulator. My father looked smaller in that bed than his diagnosis had already made him. His speech was thin, but there. His color was bad. They were watching his rhythm hour to hour. I stood at the foot of the bed and read his chart the way other people pray, then asked the resident 3 questions: his ejection fraction, the medication window, what they were thinking for disposition. I watched the young doctor recalibrate exactly who he was talking to. Through the glass of the family lounge, I could see my mother watching me, and it wasn't only relief on her face. I have stood beside a lot of spouses at a lot of bedsides, and I know what real fear for a husband looks like at 2 a.m, and I want to be fair. Some of that was there too. But layered over it, moving like a hand across a column of figures, was the look I'd finally learned to read correctly. She was counting. The medic was back. The asset was back in range. Before I left, the social worker touched my elbow. Discharge planning meeting Monday morning. Family requested you attend. I said I'd be there. My mother had requested me. Of course she had. The meeting room on the 3rd floor had a laminate table, 8 chairs, a box of tissues, and an air vent that hummed one flat note the whole time, like the building was holding its breath. Present, the social worker, a discharge planner with a laptop, Aunt Deb, my mother, and me. The clinical picture came first, laid out gently. My father would not be walking out of this admission the way he walked in. He needed skilled monitoring, cardiac rehab, medication titration under supervision, or a home setup that amounted to the same level of care, a hospital bed, monitoring equipment, and someone trained essentially around the clock. The room absorbed that quietly. Then my mother folded her hands on the laminate and arranged her face into its reasonable setting, and presented what she called the family's plan. My daughter is a paramedic, she told the social worker warmly, gesturing at me like she was unveiling the solution to a puzzle, 10 years of exactly this experience. And she has an entire house standing empty out on Silver Pine Lake, his own mother's house. Plenty of room for equipment, peace and quiet. He'll be with family, which everyone knows beats any facility. The discharge planner started typing. The social worker looked at me, and my mother turned to me too, in front of everyone, and said the line she had been saying in one version or another since I was 10 years old, counting pills into a saucer, while the adults called it adorable. She said it kindly, and I want you to hold on to that detail. She said it with love, the only kind she had, the kind that comes with a balance owing. You're the medic, Wren. This is what you're for. The vent hummed on. Deb nodded along. 18 years stood quietly behind my chair, a shelter cot, a brass key, 83 envelopes, all waiting to hear what I'd say next. I turned to the social worker first, because the system in that room deserved a clean answer before the family got its speech. I do not consent to being the discharge plan, I said. And I said it in clinical language because clinical language carries weight. A single medic working shifts cannot safely deliver round-the-clock cardiac monitoring alone in a private home. That setup fails the patient first and the caregiver second. I have responded to houses where a family tried exactly this, and I have watched how it ends, twice over. The discharge planner stopped typing. Then I turned to my mother and gave her the rest in the flattest, gentlest voice I own. I told her I had already toured 3 facilities in December, before any of this happened, because I had read my father's cardiac history myself and done the arithmetic. She blinked. I told her Cedarbrook has a dedicated heart failure unit with a bed opening this week, that his coverage application had been drafted for weeks and was sitting in a folder in my car, and that I would be his care advocate on every single chart, first call, every conference, every medication review, every Tuesday for the rest of his life, for free. You get my hands in my head for as long as he needs them, I said. What you don't get is the cottage, or the account, or me, not anymore. Her voice started climbing. After everything, and selfish, and your own father, and the older I get, the more I understand that shouting is just a ledger being read out loud. I waited it out the way you wait out weather. Then I said the last part, the part I had been 36 years drafting. You taught me a person earns their place in this family, Mom. You taught me that my whole life. I'm done earning it. I'm going to love him for free, from my own front door. And you have never once seen what that actually looks like. Watch me. She stood up slowly. My mother does everything on a metronome, even her ruptures. She gathered her coat, her purse, and her yellow highlighted pages that nobody had so much as glanced at, and assembled herself at the head of the table into the woman who has run every room she's ever walked into. And she handed down the sentence her whole religion had been building toward since before I was born. Then you have no family. One short sentence, measured, almost calm. Deb was already rising to follow her, already glaring at me on her sister's behalf, and the two of them filed out the door like a small, dignified funeral procession. The vent hummed on. The tissue box sat there, untouched, and into that ringing quiet the social worker, a woman about my age with tired, decent eyes, slid one form across the table and asked, in the softest bureaucratic mercy I've ever received, the county will need a single point of contact for his care decisions going forward. Who should I list? Who should I list? I looked at the empty doorway my family had just walked through. Then I printed my own name in the little box. Ren June Halloway, my number. And under relationship, I wrote daughter. And my hand did not shake once, which the 3 a.m. version of me would want you to know. Both things were true at that table, and I signed for both of them. I had just become the one person my father's life now depended on, and I had just stopped being my mother's daughter in any currency she recognizes. Out in the parking lot, the cold hit like a swinging door, and my hand found the brass key in my coat pocket, the green ribbon soft under my thumb, and I stood by my car and just breathed for 1 full minute by the clock. But I didn't leave the building yet. There was one visit left, and I went back up and sat by my father's bed in the 2 a.m. quiet, monitors keeping their soft green time. He was awake, his color still poor but steadying, and his eyes found me and held on. And I did the thing our family had never once done in my hearing. I told him the truth slowly, at eye level, like a grown man who deserved his own life, explained to him plainly. I told him where he was going and why. I told him Cedar Brook, the heart failure unit, that I had picked it myself back in December, that I knew the charge nurse, that the facility dog was a scruffy terrier named Biscuit who does his rounds on Thursdays. I told him I'd be there every Tuesday, that his care would always have his daughter in it, that no one would ever again decide something about him in a hallway he wasn't part of. I did not mention my mother, and he did not look for her behind me. Then his hand came across the blanket and found mine and gripped, hard, the way he used to test whether a jack would hold before he'd slide under a car. His mouth worked at something, slow, dragged uphill the whole way, and I will hear it in every quiet room for the rest of my life. Iris's girl, he knew, he had maybe always known, behind that window, in that recliner, in the silence I am still learning to forgive. His grip held, and I stayed until he slept. My father moved into Cedar Brook the second week of February. The coverage paperwork cleared the way paperwork does when a paramedic has been filling out her own family's forms correctly for a decade already. He has a window bed facing a courtyard with a bird feeder, and Biscuit makes his rounds every Thursday. And my father, who has maybe a dozen words a day left in him, has taught the entire unit the word for dog. I'm there every Tuesday. I bring coffee for the charge nurse and the newspaper for him, and some weeks I bring the letters, and I read them to him one at a time in his mother's voice through my own mouth. He listens with his eyes on the ceiling and his good hand gripping mine at the same lines every single time. The roses, the spelling tests, the part about the little medic. He was in that house while she wrote them. He let it happen. The letters say so. His grip says he knows. I read them anyway. That's what free costs, and I pay it gladly. My mother visits Sundays. The staff figured out the choreography inside a month. 2 shifts, no overlap. Nobody ever had to say it out loud. She tells her side of the family her version, a daughter who chose a dead woman's cottage over her own blood. And I stopped correcting the record months ago. Her ledger is the only language anyone ever taught her, and at 59, in a rented 2-bedroom with a husband who saves his words for a terrier, she keeps her accounts the way some women keep a rosary. I understand her now, which is not the same thing as letting her back in. The number she has for me rings a phone I check on Tuesdays, after Cedar Brook. Priya drives out to the lake most Saturdays. She's learning my grandmother's crust, and she's genuinely terrible at it, in a way that would have made Iris take the rolling pin clean out of her hands with enormous love. And we eat the failures on the porch, and I tell her the real stories, all of them, no edits. The pattern runs on believers, and my family finally ran out of the next one. Odette still comes Sundays. Retired investigators. It turns out, never fully close a file. She brought a folding chair for the porch in March, and left it there, which in Odette is basically a marriage proposal. When the ice went out on Silver Pine Lake at the end of March, it sounded like the whole winter clearing its throat, and I stood on my porch with coffee and listened to it go. The porch step doesn't groan anymore. I fixed it myself with her tools from the shed. The brass key hangs on a nail by the door now. Its job is done. It's just a house key again, resting on its loop of green ribbon. Some evenings I take out the last letter and read the line the way other people say grace. You were never the debt, Wren. You were the girl. It took 18 years, 7 totes, and a cot in a community center. But I finally believe her. Here is what my grandmother knew, and what I know now, and what I hope you carry home tonight. Any love that hands you a bill isn't love. it's rent. The people who actually love you leave the door unlocked and the key on a ribbon and never once mail you the invoice. Totes on a driveway, a cot the night before Thanksgiving, a brass key on green ribbon, that's my story. If you're the one carrying your whole family, hear me clearly. A boundary is not a betrayal, and you are allowed to love people from your own front door. If this story kept you company tonight, subscribe to Quiet Reckonings and tell me in the comments what you would have done standing on that driveway with your whole life packed in totes. I read every single one. And if you're the one keeping somebody else warm tonight, stay close. There's always room by this fire for you.